Weiss's breath came out in sharp gasps as she followed Yang's uncle through the streets. He moved without pause, at a pace they struggled to match, and yet, neither she nor Yang begged him to slow. If anything, she wished he would go faster, that he would leave them behind and get there as soon as possible. Jaune, Blake, one captured and then the next attacked right before their eyes, her squirrel dying a moment later. It had been too much for her already fried nerves, and clearly, too much for Yang and Crow as well. The journey was in silence, only the sound of their feet slamming against the pavement and their labored breathing. Up ahead, there was a great explosion and a cloud of dust that bellowed up into the sky. "Head for it," Crow growled. "Whoever's attacking them is a friend of ours right now." "Maybe it was Blake," Yang gasped. She didn't sound like she believed it, and neither did Weiss, but she nodded nonetheless. She wanted to believe it, to believe them both safe. Jaune would be, she told herself. He was strong like that. There was no way he, out of all people, would succumb to something like this. He was lazy, sure, but he always had a way out, even when he had to fight against people stronger than him. He'd cheat and trick people. This would be no different. They'd probably arrived there to find the White Fang all tied up, because he'd somehow convinced them to do it. He, in turn, would be lounging on a seat, some White Fang girl cradled in his lap. She'd kill him for making him worry. Oh, how'd he regret leaving them behind while he ran off to fight against those terrorists. Angry tears pricked at the edge of her vision, and she clenched her hands into fists. She'd make him suffer, because he would be okay. He'd be there for her to scold him. He'd be in one piece, fine and healthy, with Blake rolling her eyes beside him. She'd be so angry, but he would make some stupid wisecrack and turn her anger against her. Then he'd pull her in for a hug and tell her not to worry. She forced any doubts aside. That was the way it would happen. She'd make sure of it. "Be ready for combat," the huntsman warned. "Don't hesitate. We strike hard and fast, and take out every person we find. I know you want to rush in and help your teammates, but we have to get them out safely as well." They erupted out of a dark tunnel into a scene of complete chaos. Fire and smoke rolled out from one building, and as uniformed faunists ran back and forth, another explosion shook it. The scent of dust on the air, a little further to the north, a bristle howl cut through the din, a sign that they had not been the only ones to draw to the carnage. "The train," Yang said. "That's what Blake said they were going to use to hit Vale." "Not if we stop it from moving," Crow growled. Weiss barely listened to them. She looked around the battlefield, eyes darting for any sign of her missing teammate. "Blake!" she yelled, uncaring of the white thing around them. It wasn't like their arrival had been stealthy. "Blake! Where are you?" "Looks like we got company," Yang growled, as several men ran their way. "We don't give a hoot about you right now. Get out of our way." "Kill them," one of the attackers shouted, as if they'd get the chance. Weiss's fury fed her exhausted muscles, revitalizing them as she dashed forward and past the first goon's attack. Her weapon pierced deep into his arm, causing him to drop his. He fell to one knee, clutching the wound, only to receive the hilt in his face. "I don't have time for you," she snapped. "Jaune, where are you?" A bullet whizzed past her own. Weiss darted to the left, summoning a glyph beneath her and zigzagging her way towards her foe, dodging his shots with ease. He panicked when she came close, but she gave him no time to flee. "You're in the way," she yelled, charging at him and swiping his legs out from under him with her blade. He looked up to her with a terrified expression, but she slammed her foot against his face. "Blake!" she howled. "Jaune!" A shotgun blast rang out from behind her, followed by a loud yell as Yang introduced someone to the side of a nearby building. "Blake! Jaune!" Weiss yelled again. She scowled as another attack came, when she parried one to the side. A leap and a parry allowed her to backhand the faunus, then follow up with a stinging slap delivered on the edge of her blade. He flipped through the air and landed with a groan. Behind his drowned body, rushing towards them, she spied a familiar figure. Blake. The sight of her was enough to make Weiss cry out. Not words, just a visceral sound of pure relief. She surged forwards and caught the girl as she stumbled, kneeling down as Blake panted for breath. She was slick with mud and covered in bruises, but oh, so very alive. Weiss pulled her into a tight hug. She didn't want to let her go. "You're alive," she whispered, voice hoarse. "I thought I lost you. I thought you'd been... You stupid girl." "Jaune," Blake asked, hugging her back but pushing away a second later. "I couldn't find him. Torchwick has him. He said he'd done something to him. Something to make him talk." "He wouldn't talk," Weiss said, but that only made Blake's message worse. They both knew he wouldn't sell them out, so what had Torchwick done to achieve it? She bit her lip and tried to smile for her teammate. "It doesn't matter anyway. We're here, and there's nothing he could reveal even if he did. We're going to save him, Blake. It's going to be okay. We'll be a team again." "Where is he?" Crow asked, striding up, even as Yang rushed forward to throw her arms around her partner as well. "Yang, this isn't the time. Where's your team leader?" "He's in that building." Blake pointed back at a rather dull building. "He was in there, but..." "Never mind," Crow growled. "I see him." "What?" Weiss gasped and spun about, eyes going wide as she saw a figure in a White Fang uniform clamber onto the train. Over his shoulder, a familiar mop of blonde hair bounced up and down. "Jaune!" she cried. He had to be alive. Why else would they carry him? It was another shock of relief, but also one of anger and rage. They had him. The train rattled and shook, a horrible sound of metal clanking onto metal rushing through the air. With a great ka-chunk, the piston began to turn the wheels, the vehicle coming to life. White Fang members screamed and cried, many of them breaking ranks to rush towards it as it left without them. "We can't leave him," Blake said. "We won't," Weiss promised. "We need to stop that train from bringing the Grim into Vale. Isn't that right?" she asked, looking to Yang's uncle. He nodded back. "Get on that train," he said. "That's our ticket back to Vale, and we'll pick up your boyfriend on the way. I've no idea what Torchwick wants with him, but it can't be good." Whatever it was, it didn't matter. He wouldn't be allowed to have Jaune, not when she was here. He was her teammate, her leader, her partner. Her eyes burned as she dashed forward, the team following behind her. He was hers, and if anyone dared to stand in her way, well, they'd find out what happened to those who dared take something away from a Snee. Osmond stood at his window, high in the tower of Beacon, a mug of coffee in hand. It failed to warm him like it should, and the pervasive chill that had seeped into his body some hours earlier remained, as it had for the last 15 minutes. He found his eyes drawn in a direction of that mountain, of Mountain Glen. He sipped his coffee, if only to ward away the chance he might speak his doubt. A man in his position had to lead, not be seen to worry. They were a skilled team, led by a bright young man, old before his years, and oh so jaded, but cunning in his own way. Crow would see them safe as well. Irresponsible as he might appear, there were few he trusted more. Why, then, could he not shake the strange sensation that gripped him? Why did he continue to stare? Perhaps he worried for naught. Perhaps dear Galinda was right, and he needed some time off for himself. He would not take it, of course, not with the actions of this queen weighing heavily upon his conscience. A distraction, then. Something to busy his mind and allow him the peace he required. It was difficult to turn back to his desk. His eyes wished to watch still, his hand to touch the glass and dispel his own reflection. He forced himself to take one step, however, and one soon became two, and two, three. A little paperwork, some forms about the upcoming festival, and even an open and read missive from his old friend James. Those things, and simple, steel anchored, open and discarded upon the woodwork. Perhaps indulging his curiosity. A little would take his mind away from such concerns. It could not hurt, at least. The small chip came free from the anklet, the tracker slotting into his terminal as he brought up a map of Mr. Ark's movements across Vale. His hand stilled. The floor rattled, metallic, cold against his face. It soothed and hurt at the same time. Sound came in and out of focus, but he could hear loud clanking, like metal falling and rising, of motion and locomotion. There was rattling too, as though the box they were in might shake itself loose. A train, his mind told him. That felt important somehow. Why can't I remember? There were 4 people nearby, another a little distance away, talking to the one he hated. 5 animals and 1 monster. One of the animals was a big one, but the other 4 were small and insignificant. They were mice. They were rats. I don't care what it takes, Perry. Detach the last few cars early. Whatever is needed. The last thing we want is for those blasted idiots to catch up with us. I can see to them personally. The masked one growled. I've always wanted to kill a Schnee. Fingers scraped at the metal door, drawing into a fist. There was only anger. A visceral hatred that boiled within him, that made him snarl and try to move. White and red, but no red on white. That never washed off and it never went away. He wouldn't let that stain happen. He couldn't let it. Was washing important? He felt like it wasn't. And yet all that repeated in his head was that he had to make sure no red dashed white. Fine. Do whatever you need to do. I'll be ahead making sure this damn thing goes to plan. Don't let anyone pass. Got it? The man in white didn't wait for an answer, but instead strode past and through a metal door. His footsteps echoed away. He knows. Too much. It was a certainty. Somewhere deep inside. He needed to stand and follow. To ask him to forget. To take that knowledge and remove it. What knowledge? It was something to do with remembering. It was something to do with colors and fire and ash and blood. Make, stop. Make what stop? The memories, the pain, or the man who knew too much? Both. You 4 stay here, the large one instructed. Make sure he stays in one piece. Don't let anyone kill him. Yes, sir. One of them sighed. He waited until the large one left before sighing. Eesh. Talk about a waste of time. People are out there fighting for the cause, and we're stuck guarding a stinking human. Drugged up on that, another laughed, and delivered a sharp kick to his stomach. Who's the animal now, huh? You're lying on the floor like a dog. Quit it. If Perry finds out you're doing that, or worse, Torchwick, then you'd be in trouble. Who's gonna know? We'll say he had a fit and did it to himself. He laughed and kicked the down man again, delighting in the groan that came from him. It wasn't the impact he reacted to, but rather the rolling waves in his head. The pain was muted, dulled by experience, but also the fire that burned inside his body, the drugs that tore away at his insides. It was the thick mist in his head that made him moan, more because he knew, with a certainty, he couldn't place, that he had to do something. But what? What was he supposed to do? Need focus. Focus on what? What was he supposed to focus on? He wished the voice would tell him, if only so he could do it and shut it up. Stop. He knows. He knows. Knows what and why? Too much? Is that what the voice meant? He felt he knew too much as well. Too much of what the floor felt like, of what the inside of his mind looked like. He could smell color and see the sound of the man above him cackling. He knew he hated the animals, and that something important was happening. He was on a train. That was important. He was heading back to Vale. What was Vale? Vale was important. He was... Train. Vale. Beacon. Breach. Death. Blood. Ash. Fire. Cinder. That word. He hated it. Oh, how he hated it. It made his teeth grit and his head pulse. He growled into the metal floor, coiling in on himself. What was Cinder? How did he stop it? How did he make it go away? That word. It would do something to someone, and that was something he knew he couldn't let happen, even though the fog and the nausea. It was purpose. It was direction. It was everything he was. She'll hurt them. Hurt who? Weiss, Yang, Blake. All of them. Names. He didn't know names, and yet he did. A blast of color and emotion that stole his breath away. They were nothing, just words on the mind, and yet everything at the same time. They meant everything, were everything. He would do anything. He would do everything. He had to do everything. Who would dare hurt them? A single tear ran down his cheek. Stop. Yes, he wanted to make it stop. He wanted to make them stop. There were wild animals everywhere, and they were so dangerous. They wanted nothing more than to rip and to tear. To tear at what? To tear at white, to tear at black and yellow, but to make them all stained red. Yes, he had to make that stop, make them stop. But how was he supposed to? He asked the voice, repeating the question in his mind. Kill them. Oh. Was that it? Bloodshot eyes snapped open. His body shook. Okay. Weiss staggered for a moment when she landed on the roof of the moving train. It was slow at first, but each time it juddered, it made her stomach leap into her throat. A heavy hand landed on her shoulder, pushing her down to her knees. Stay low, Crow advised. Take a few seconds to get used to the motion or you'll fall off. He followed his own advice by falling to one knee, with Blake and Yang mimicking him. His head turned toward Blake. You said this is destined for Vale? That's what the map said. Blake called, voice raised to be heard over the sound of the whistling air and rattling tracks. They were moving dust on board, and the exit tunnel was sealed up. When the train hits, boom. Yang finished. Eesh, talk about a one-way trip. We need to push forward, the huntsman decided. A destination is the head of the train, to bring it to a stop so the people of Vale don't have to deal with this. Weiss's patience couldn't hold anymore. She pushed his hand off her and stood up. What about Jaune? I refuse to ignore what happened to him. Well, he's on the train, Ice Princess. Chances are, he's somewhere near the front. We'll find him, Weiss, Blake whispered, appearing behind her and placing both hands on her shoulders. Don't worry, we're not going to leave him behind. I've got to give him this after all. Blake pointed over her shoulder to the familiar sword which was strapped across her back, between her shoulder blades and the backpack she wore. You're right. Weiss took a deep breath and let it go. I'm sorry. I allowed my emotions to get the better of me. Good job you apologized, Crow grinned. I was almost starting to respect a sneeze for a moment. That was close. Can it, old man, Yang said. I'm with Weiss on this one. Now let's get going. The blonde didn't wait for them to respond, but rather dashed forward, trusting in them to follow. They did, of course, with the huntsman bringing up the rear. They leapt from the first carriage to the second, sticking to the top of the train since the ceiling was quite a far away above them. What about the bombs? Blake asked. Decouple the cars. Crow leapt down between two of them and drew back his weapon to do just that. There was a loud ka-chung, however, and the last car they'd been on began to slip away. Did you do that? Yang asked nervously. I'm good, Firecracker, but I'm not that good. They watched in silence as the car rolled back, putting 20, maybe 30 meters distance between them, before a loud crack sounded and an explosive rocked the back of it. The metal groaned and twisted, flipping off the tracks entirely, before a second, larger detonation blasted a hole into the ceiling. Were they trying to catch us in that? Weiss asked as she felt the wind from the blast hit her face. No, Crow growled. It wasn't us they were aiming for. Several chunks of the stone roof slammed down, and a beat of sunlight cut down into the depths. Among the wreckage, black rain seemed to fall down from the opening. No, that wasn't rain at all. Weiss's eyes widened as she saw red flash in the dark. They're drawing the Grim, she said. This is how they intend to bring them to Vale? They don't plan to just open a path as a distraction. This is an all-out attack on the city. Get to the front, Crow roared. Hurry, stop the train at all costs. Her heart pounded, but she nodded and pushed on across the carriage, leaping over the gap at the end and landing on the next. He sped after them, and the noise sounded again as that car too started to pull away. Crow leapt the distance with ease and signaled for them to keep going. The next two they crossed as well, and whoever the White Fang were releasing the carriages, they seemed to be doing it to some kind of plan. Rather than to get rid of them, the three of them, plus Zui, kept running on, moving up as far as they could. Jaune would be near to the front. She had to believe that was true. It wouldn't have made sense for them to abduct him and then let him go on one of the rear carriages. They might as well left him to die in Mountain Glen. Weiss narrowed her eyes, determined to find her missing partner. Movement up ahead signaled a change in the White Fang's tactics. Several figures in uniform climbed up on top of the roof of the train, ascending ladders between each car and drawing weapons. They must be out of bomb cars, Yang said. At least I hope that's the cause. Otherwise that means these guys are perfectly okay with sacrificing their own to die. I'm sure Tortrick would, but these guys are the ones who filled the train. Blake pointed out. They wouldn't come up here if they knew it was going to detach and kill them. Good thoughts across the board, but unimportant in the current situation. A growl slipped from Weiss's throat as she tore her weapon free and leveled it at those before her. We're not taking any chances, she said. Deal with these guys and push through. Our destination is the control room. Aye aye, Captain. Yang laughed. The blonde ducked under the blade of her opponent's, knocking his arm wide with a sharp slap before launching a punishing blow to his face. The figure snapped down into the compartment below, but Weiss's attention was soon taken up by her own. She swayed past a clumsy lunge and stepped past the Faunus. The hilt of her weapon slammed into his spine, knocking him back even as she moved on. There's no time to deal with each and every one of you, she thought, igniting her dust and causing an explosion that blasted a second attacker to the ground. The woman with antlers rolled and shrieked, patting the flames off her clothing, but Weiss had already dashed by. Stop them! One Faunus yelled. How relentless. The fanatics pulled themselves up and onto the carriages even as others were incapacitated and knocked away. Crow caught up with them before long, and then the battle really went against them. Yet still they came. They're determined, Weiss panted, back against Blake's. I'll give them that. They have nothing to lose. I'm not sure any of them expect to survive this. Blake pushed off her back and ducked under an opponent's lunge. Her weapon cut a pattern around their legs, the ribbon tripping them even as she slammed the butt of her gun into the jaw of another. She parried and dropped a heel on the first, right as he cried out and covered his face with his hands. They're not going to stop, she called back. All they need to do is distract us long enough until we reach Vale. That much was obvious. But what wasn't was their plan upon hitting the city. Weiss parried a staff and pushed its wielder aside. If the train hit the city, those on board would surely perish, if not from the explosion, then caught in the crossfire between Grim and the Huntsman. Why would they agree to that? Realization dawned, in a moment, that had her gas and turned to the others. The Paladins. This is what they wanted those stolen Paladins for. Seems like it, lass. Crow grunted, a White Fang member under each arm. He slammed their heads together and then tossed them off the train in a rather blatant disregard for their lives. Those that fell surely died, if not from the fall, then the grim which pursued the train. With those suits, they'd have been able to make an escape or go down in a serious firefight. I guess you girls managed to put a stop to that, even if you did run face first into trouble. I can't wait to tell Jaune. Yang grinned. That'll teach him to say we risk our lives for nothing. We'll tell him when we find him. Why smirked. She darted towards the last opponent but backed away when he swung. The Faunus's blade struck the metal floor at the same time his eyes widened in panic. She gave him no further chances, slipping into his guard and driving the hilt of her weapon up under his jaw. She caught the body as it fell and pushed it back into the carriage. She wasn't quite as prepared to have blood on her hands as Yang's uncle. Well, she said and dusted her hands. That's that dealt with. I wouldn't be so sure, Blake murmured. Weiss was about to ask what the girl meant, but for the clack of something landing atop the train ahead. She pointed her weapon at the foe, tilting her head to the side at the sight of her. She was small, smaller than even herself, with odd-colored hair and mismatched eyes. The girl stood up from a crouched position and twirled a small parasol onto her shoulder. With an almost cocky smile, she looked towards them and bowed. Blake, you know this one? I've never seen her before. She isn't with the White Fang. The heiress hummed. Whatever she was, the girl was standing in their path. She made no move to approach, but clearly wasn't going to allow them past. Against 3 huntresses in training and 1 official huntsman, the girl's cruel smile seemed out of place. That worried Weiss more than she dared admit. Ugh, Yang yelled. I don't care who she is. You're in our way. Move. The pink and cream-haired girl tilted her head to one side and smiled cutely, as though asking her to repeat the question. That proved too much for Yang's patience, and the brawler's hair flashed gold as she rushed forward. Yang, wait! Crow yelled. Yang didn't. She threw a punch towards the smaller girl's face, only to growl as it missed. The tiny girl slipped from the left to right, dodging each attack with ease, never once breaking her smile, nor her pose. She was fast, deadly fast. Sit still and take a beating, Yang yelled. She reared one arm back and lunged forward, discharging her weapon as she did. Weiss's eyes widened as she saw the smoke clear, and that the girl had easily caught Yang's arm on the edge of a parasol. The criminal wrapped her hands around the limb, twisting and stepping into Yang's guard to pull her off balance. Yang staggered back, footing lost, towards the edge of the train. Her heart leapt into her throat, one arm outstretched as she watched the girl chamber a kick prepared to launch Yang off, to fall back into the tidal wave of death and murder. No! Weiss screamed. A gunshot rang. It struck the ground where the girl had stood, forcing her back. Heavy footfalls echoed as Crow dashed forward and grabbed Yang by her jacket, pulling her back and into them. The blonde fell, cradled between Blake and Weiss. The older huntsman stood before them, weapon deployed as he stared at their foe. She twirled her parasol and smiled at them. She's dangerous, Weiss thought. She was able to defeat Yang so easily, and she's probably the strongest out of us all. The chances against the girl were all the worse for the battlefield they fought on. Normally, they could have just used teamwork to wear their enemy down, but out here, all it would take was to lose your footing for a moment, and you'd be dead. This girl didn't need to beat them. She just needed to knock them off the train. Crow seemed to realize that, for he flung an arm out before them. Get Yang up and go downstairs, he said, never once taking his eyes from the girl. You need to make the rest of the way below. I'll keep her busy while you get to the front and shut this down. The train continued to rattle and howl as it traveled through the tunnel. But if the girl heard Crow's words, she appeared remarkably unconcerned with them. Blake helped Yang to her feet, while Weiss backed away to the last carriage they crossed. The last thing they saw as they descended was the huntsman's weapon crack apart and begin to extend. Any more was cut off as they forced the door open and pushed inside. But the sudden clash of steel above told them more than enough. "Will he be okay?" Weiss asked, gripping the corgi and putting him down on the ground. This wasn't the place for a dog, but there was little she could do. "Uncle Crow is tougher than he looks. If anyone can handle someone like that, it's him. We should focus more on finding Daddy Dearest and stopping this train. There'll be White Fang ahead. We should stay together and be cautious." Weiss fished around in her skirt for a second. She found the clip she'd been looking for and held it out. "Blake, I had this made for you. It might come in useful." "Oh, thanks, but I already have plenty of dust ammunition." Weiss blinked and looked at the girl. She did? Dust had gotten pretty expensive lately, and the last time she checked, Blake wasn't exactly made of line. "How?" she asked. "Did you steal it from the terrorist?" "Not exactly." Blake shrugged the backpack on his shoulder and placed it down between them. Curious, Yang and Weiss leaned over as the Faunus pulled it open. Yang whistled. "It's Jaune's," Blake said by the way of explanation. It was honestly irritating how easily she accepted that. That partner of mine certainly has a lot of explaining to do when I get a hold of him. School spas were one thing, but this was ridiculous. Still, there was no arguing it wasn't useful. "Ladies?" Yang grinned. "Let's get to this."